Welcome to Talk Flicks with Boss Chicks. I am your host, Crystal, and today we are continuing our conversation about race relations, the police, and the justice system in this country. And we will be referencing the documentary I'm Not Your Negro, in addition to a couple of other clips and articles that I've actually been reading over the course of this week. So it's a very important conversation. So make sure you like this video. Make sure you comment below. You know, we want everyone to be involved in this conversation because it's only through having these conversations with everyone that we can put forth actionable solutions to the problems that we find ourselves in. So let's get into our introductions of our panel. We have a really good panel today. He is a Marine vet, a writer, and an ocean rower. And he has a degree in kinesiology from Texas Lutheran. Next, we have Reverend Jazier Urania. He is the pastor of Liberation Baptist Church in Houston, Texas. He's also a community activist, and he has his degree in clinical psychology from Texas Southern University. Quan Blunthill. He is a director of research and data analytics for the Brooklyn DA's office. He is a soon-to-be doctorate in criminal justice with a focus on social identity, psychology of justice, and the Black experience. And he will be getting his degree from John Jay. Last week, we started off talking about the documentary. And one of the questions, I thought was just a brilliant way to start this documentary, was just asking the question of, why is the Negro not optimistic just about the future? And so I wanted to kind of talk to you guys about that question of whether or not you feel optimistic about the future as far as race relations, why or why not? So we'll start with you, Quan.
Yeah, I'd say I feel optimistic. I think it depends on what one means when one says optimistic. So do I believe that race relations have a trajectory of getting better over the long term? Sure. I think that as long as people are willing to work on improving those relations, then I think I have to believe really that we can be successful at it, right? It's important for you and for me and for everyone that there's enough people like myself who believe that that type of work can actually be fruitful. To not be optimistic essentially means that you don't believe that there's anything you can do to change things, and the natural and logical conclusion of that would be for you not to do anything at all. So I think we're seeing a lot in our streets, an example of the fact and a demonstration of the fact that a lot of people are indeed optimistic. It's important, though, to contextualize what we mean by optimism, right? That being optimistic is not a completely, rose-colored glasses view of race relations as being continuously and in unobstructed fashion, like on a trajectory upwards or more positive, right? Yep, you have steps forward and you have steps back, and kind of the trajectory goes back and forth. And I expect that to happen so that I'm not as disappointed when there are steps back. It simply lets me know that it's time for me to kick into gear and to push the steps forward, that's to be expected. I think as long as all of us believe that, then hopefully we will see the trajectory go in a positive direction. In fact, there was a time not too long in the past, particularly when you look at the scope of human history, that instead of sitting here talking to you in this like log cabin looking background, I might be in chains and picking cotton. I'm not now. So history has shown that there is a positive trajectory towards justice, and we hopefully will just continue to move in that direction.
Well, I think that I'm very optimistic, actually. Along with working in the church, I work in the public schools, and when you look at young people, you see that they are trying to deconstruct a lot of the social constructs that preceded them, right? They're no longer accepting sort of like what has been the status quo with race relations. Another thing that you see is that people of color are now having a much greater voice in directing the dialogue, because a lot of times what you have is that when you look at race relations, oftentimes the dialogue is controlled by people that are not within the community, right? They oftentimes are the ones that sort of set the temperature about what they feel race relations are about. So now that we have more voices, I think that that's a big thing, is that our society has a lot more voices. It's a lot harder to just have a few people directing the dialogue. A 13-year-old kid with his cell phone is contributing to that dialogue. You know, it's a viral dialogue that's going on, and it's something that's happening not only here in the United States, but it's happening on an international level. As you see, these types of movements are happening. And always as these movements start to generate more momentum, there's always a pushback. Anytime a society's views, its values, and its history is confronted, there's always going to be a traditional sect of the population that's going to say, hey, let's keep it here. You know, we've commented about this so much that even the simple slogan of that Donald Trump had, that our president had, of Make America Great Again, is based on the presupposition that we're headed in the wrong direction. So, you know, for a lot of us people of color like myself, who was the first person in my family to get a 4-year degree, the first person in my family to get an advanced degree, you know, I'm saying we're going in the right direction, right? But, you know, the narrative is continuing to evolve, but I'm very optimistic. That's not to say that there's not going to be, as one of our other panelists says, a lot of resistance or obstacles. But I mean, that's just a fact that anytime you do something significant, you have to overcome those barriers and you have to stay positive.
I thought Reverend Jazeer made a really good point about not allowing hateful rhetoric to come from him, right? Because we've seen with everybody having a voice, you have both responsible and irresponsible actors among all different factions, right? And I think it's important to remember the fact that an eye for an eye leaves everyone blind. And I think it's really important that we continue to have these type of conversations because, you know, one of the things that I talked about last week is I come from a very unique perspective, right? Despite the fact that I'm in the South, I came from a very integrated community from very early on. And so when you see some of these negative stereotypes, they never really struck a chord with me, right? And so as far as hope and optimism, I've had hope and optimism for the longest time, as Quan said, because if we don't, then where does that leave us? If we just say, you know what, nothing's gonna get better, if we're pessimistic and we buy into the rhetoric of irresponsible actors who say that hate is the only way, then, I mean, where does that leave anybody? Nobody's gonna win from that. Nobody's gonna profit from that. Nobody's gonna do any better. Everybody's just gonna be angry at each other all the time. And honestly, like, that's not a world I want to live in. That's not a world I want to raise my kids in. Oh, you know, and I very highly doubt that any of you want to raise your kids in a world like that as well. So I think it should be optimistic. I think there's more that we can do. But I think it starts with, you know, some of these conversations that we're having like we are today.
Back to what you're saying about there's more we can do. What can you, and I'm talking to all of you individually, using your platform and your abilities to actually bring about the change that we're all striving for? Because one of the things that was very interesting from the documentary is James Baldwin says that, you know, Americans are always kind of trapped between what they're aspiring to be and what they are. And so
Yes.
it's almost like they never get to, you know, being that more perfect union. It's always like, you know, they're just trying to get there. So what can we do using our platforms individually to bring about, you know, that the promised land that we're all trying to get to?
So specifically, of course, I work in criminal justice, right? And so this moment in history has been precipitated by activities that took place in the criminal justice system. I have a unique ability to impact those types of circumstances. Director of Research and Data Analytics for the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. It's one of the largest prosecutorial offices in the country. Our jurisdiction has over 2 million people in it, approximately 3 million, I guess, if you round up, which means that the research work even that I'm doing is in part being used to determine prosecutorial policies that may determine whether the population in Rikers Jail in New York City goes up from its current place of about 4,000 to some of its previous numbers. I mean, previously in Brooklyn, we incarcerated on charges coming from our office approximately 1,200 people as recently as just 2 months ago. And we're now down to approximately 800, in part because of some of the research that suggested that some folks might have been released. We were kind of pushed to do this based on the current public health crisis. But research suggested that those people could be released and that there would not be a major adverse crime impact from releasing those folks. That's something that I specifically have been able to do. As I talk to you now, this conversation, I guess, is a break a little bit in some of the scholarship that I'm doing right now, writing a paper, just presenting interviews that I and a team of other researchers conducted in Newark and Cleveland years before, actually a couple years ago, back in 2016, with people who had had contact with the criminal justice system, who told stories of procedural injustice in their encounters with police and could recount in great detail what it was like to endure those encounters and the type of cynicism that it often left them with. I have the unique ability to talk to those folks, to study those folks, present their findings and their voices, and to craft recommendations for responses. I think that in general, right? So for people who don't work in the criminal justice system and aren't going to be like research officials for criminal justice agencies, there's certainly a lot that people can do. I think from a criminal justice side specifically, there's a lot of power contained just within the vote of individuals, right? My boss, the Brooklyn DA, is actually elected, so that means that each voting individual within that jurisdiction has some influence, if nothing else, by choosing who my boss is by exercising their vote. And you do that on a lot of different levels, including who you choose for president, who you choose for senator, who you choose for US congressperson, but also all of your local elections that are often forgotten or not paid as much attention to, including the mayor who chooses your police chief, or the sheriff that governs the sheriff's department of your county. I think more generally, it's also important and incumbent on us to have conversations like this, to have relationships, even, right? How we treat people, how we deal with each other can go a long way in terms of understanding where different people come from and demonstrating the ability to reach across differences in cultural backgrounds or individual personalities to come together.
You have to decide to live intentionally, first of all. You have to decide sort of like, well, what is my life about? What am I going to do? How am I going to live my life in a very basic way? And, personally, I've always worked in the public and on the community levels, whether it's in the churches, the public schools, whether it's through activism. But I feel that the greatest way that you can provoke a greater dialogue is, first of all, learning how to be an expert listener, okay? You have to learn how to listen. I mean, because it doesn't matter who you are, you come with a preset of assumptions about a lot of things. And so you have to learn how to really listen and take in what other people are saying. And, you have to, in a certain sense, increase your sensitivity and lessen your sensitivity at the same time, if that makes any sense. You have to increase your sensitivity in your willingness to listen, but you have to decrease your sensitivity in that sometimes your assumptions about life and your perspective on life may come into question, right? One of the things that I talk to about students oftentimes is, when they're describing the phenomenon and seeing what's happening, when they're observing things that the president is saying or other public figures of prominence in society are saying, one of the things that I commonly encounter is that why are white people like this? You know, and I tell them, now wait a second, you're saying why are white people like this, but you get mad when they tell you why are black people like this, you know? So it's sometimes you have to bring to light the type of stereotypical beliefs that are embedded into our own cultural fabric too. I mean, we have to call it like it is, and we have to be honest with ourselves, and we have to examine ourselves as well. You know, we can't contribute to a rhetoric of divisiveness. We have to do something to try to steer it towards the center, right? And the way that I do it is by listening and talking to people and helping people that may not have the same platform or the same opportunities as I do to be a voice for people that may not have the opportunity. And frankly, I push people to share their narrative. Being involved in a community that's very integrated, like one of our panelists really said, it challenged a lot of the assumptions that later came out, and I was like, well, I don't view like that. I know educated Black folks, I know Latino entrepreneurs. That's just not the lifestyle that I grew up in. You know, I've seen that. And so when people like myself who've lived that type of integrated lifestyle can directly attack some of these, you know, stereotypes and start dismantling these things, because we have to understand that these are deeply embedded social constructs that are sometimes operating on a subconscious level. You know, something as simple as, you know, me walking up to a lady in a supermarket who dropped something and having her clutch her bag when she sees me. Now, she didn't intend to do that. You know, that was a subconscious reaction based on stereotypes that she's seen. But when I tell her, hey, you dropped this, man, instead of saying, hey, why are you clutching your purse? You know, I didn't do anything to you. You know, that's going to further cause more distance in that dialogue than me continuing to sometimes be the bigger person. And I think that that's something that a lot of people need to understand. It's okay to get angry. It's okay to have righteous indignation, but we have to have some level of self-control, right? And we have to have some level of human decency. You know, we can't be on the job and get mad and just throw our computer across the room just because we're upset. That doesn't work. And see, I think that that's one of the things that has really happened is this unchecked anger, this unchecked vitriol has gotten to such an extent and has been so normalized in our society that right now it kind of hinders the dialogue. People need to sit together and do it in the same way that Jesus did, and just break bread with people who are not like you. Break bread with people who don't look like you. Break bread with people who've had different experiences from you, because that's the only way that you're ever going to challenge the stereotypes. It's a fact that the more monocultural your society you grow up in, the more mythologies you believe about people that don't look like you.
I think, you know, one of the things that has been lost in this day and age is that mentorship relationship. You know, how, if you don't come from a place where you have good role models and you're basing all your social interactions and judgments upon what you've seen, how are you going to learn any different unless you have somebody to teach you, right? And vice versa. I think that not only when you take on the role of a mentor do you help lift someone up and give them the benefit of your wisdom, but you also benefit from their unique perspective. And that in turn makes you more effective as a mentor as well. Like, I would love to see more mentorship, opportunities. I don't know what you guys are doing right now, but man, I would love to see kids mentored by Quan, and I would love to see kids mentored by Reverend Jazier. And I like to believe, at least, that I've come from a good place where I can recognize right and wrong, true right and wrong, not just right and wrong as I may have been influenced to believe, but that you truly do treat people according to the content of their heart, because that's truly what matters. I think that's what I can do. You know, I'm not involved in the criminal justice system. I've been encouraged to run for office. I don't know if I will. I hate politicians as a general rule. And I would then have to hate myself.
That's why you should run, John, for that reason.
But I think, like Reverend Jazier said, like it is a community issue. Therefore, get into your community, be that difference within your community. You know, I'm very lucky. I work from home most of the time. And so throughout the day, I get to have interactions with, you know, the kids and teenagers in my neighborhood. And if they're doing stupid stuff, then I'm be like, hey, it's not really a great idea. And if they're hurt, I can offer first aid. If they are, you know, having difficulties with their parents, I can be a sympathetic ear. You know, there's a lot of different roles that you can take to be involved in your community that kind of, I think it removes hate from people's lives when you show them that you care. And that's, I think that's what at least I can do in my sphere of influence.
As we are kind of, you know, looking at this, you know, this mirror that has been put up in front of us as far as, you know, race relations and how we treat each other, you know, we all are seeing that a lot of, particularly, you know, this wave of, you know, racial tension has emanated from interactions with the police. And so a lot of, you know, people are demanding to, you know, about defunding the police and, you know, researching what that even means. And it's interesting because I was watching one of, I think it was Dave Chappelle's last recent stand-up, and he had mentioned Christopher Dorner, which I forgot about him, honestly. And he was just saying how, you know, he kind of turned renegade because of stuff that happened, like what happened with George Floyd. And so I was like, I'm gonna go back and kind of read his manifesto. So I was reading that this morning and a little bit last night, because it was really long. It was longer than I had remembered. And so I was reading it and I was like, it was kind of making me angry because it was like, he was saying the stuff that we're saying now. And he had mentioned how like the cops who were involved in the Rodney King beating, they were like promoted to like colonels and lieutenants and all this stuff. And it's like, how, like I'm trying to think of any other career field where you do the most shameful job in it and then you actually get promoted. And so I just was wanting to ask you guys, like, what do we do about this issue? Because I feel like this is like a big part of why we're here. And if we don't fix that, that will be one of the main reasons why we don't get to that place where we all feel like there's equality everywhere.
Like the one that I work for, can certainly take a better hand in actually prosecuting officers when they do something that is in violation of the criminal law, in the same way that we do for our citizens, right? That our officers should be held at least to the same standard as our citizens, and probably a higher one. And
completely agree with that. Completely agree with the higher standard, by the way. Just had to say that.
I mean, I think that that's what they are called to do and was part of their oath. So I guess I'll just say that. I think that, you know, this is not entirely left to the police to police themselves, but that there's an entire structure of bodies that have impact on the police, including, for instance, for most cities, there's city or county councils who approve their budgets and can impact their behavior through that realm. Mayors or county supervisors or commissioners who directly have executive authority over these agencies, in some cases even choose the people who run those agencies or who actually negotiate contracts in some places where there are union contracts that can make it difficult to fire or prosecute officers, and prosecutors themselves, often either on the local or state, and in some cases the federal levels, make a decision on whether to bring criminal charges against individual officers or in some cases against whole police departments. And I think that all of those actors should be held to account to ensure that our brothers in blue honor their commitment to the community that they serve, right? Who don't serve them, but that they serve, in order to uphold what it is that we require.
You know, the thing about these narratives about police brutality and mistreatment by cops, you know, those things run rampant through the community. I've had several people come up to me and talk to me about anecdotes. I mean, there's officers that are known in the community, like, hey, watch out with that guy if he pulls you over, you know, be it, watch out for these cops, or watch out from, and that only happens from an accumulation of the community's actual face-to-face time with certain officers. But I think that when we talk about if real change has to come, you know, there's this faulty belief in a lot of authority structures. Even parents do this. Like, oh, I don't want my kid to know that I've done things wrong, because if my child knows that I've done things wrong, then my child's going to feel that he can do all the same things that I did. But see, that's a faulty way of reasoning. Actually, children, all types of people benefit when we can actually be honest and say, you know what, I'm a human being. Even me, I'm a pastor, but you know what, I've made mistakes. You know, I did things that I'm not proud of. And I'm telling you that you can overcome mistakes and you can still be a great person, that there's not a single soul walking that's perfect. And so like within the police department, they feel that if they highlight crimes that are done by police officers, it undermines their ability to police, when actually it enhances it, because then you create community trust. When police departments are transparent about what's going on, this is a bad apple, he did something wrong and he's going to be punished and be held accountable just like any person, then the community says, I can trust these guys, because if they're willing to be honest about what's going on within their departments, then they'll be honest in how they interact with me as a community. You know, in police departments, everybody knows that if you're the police that's a snitch, that it's a career destroyer. It is a career destroyer. If you start snitching on other cops, this guy's planting drugs, this guy's taking illegal money, this guy's sleeping with so-and-so, this person's being rough with people, then you get killed because they feel that they can't trust you. And that's is exactly really what it's
what happened with Christopher Dorner. Like when I was reading this manifesto, I'm like, wow. And it's interesting because I'm working on a documentary because I really want to kind of explore the whole good cop, bad cop theory. And so when I have been, reaching out to officers, even in different cities, and even within my own family, like I have a cousin that was a cop. She's not even a cop anymore because she left because it was just, she told me, she said, I don't even, I appreciate you, wanting to do this and expose this. But she was like, honestly, I don't know if I can do the interview because it takes me back to a place that gives me anxiety. And so the fact that cops, whether they're still cops or not cops, have this anxiety where they cannot speak up and say what is going on, what's wrong, so we can actually start making these changes effectively. To me, it boggles my mind, but then it also makes me wonder, is this the mafia? What is really going on in here?
It speaks to the level of fear that's inspired. Look, when you got a group of individuals, whether it be a police department, or it could be outside, it can be your local clique. If 10 guys get together and decide to make a pact that they're going to terrorize groups, that they're going to use weapons, that they're going to use violence, that's a tremendous deterrent from people saying something. And the same thing happens within the police department. Because they know that retribution is possible in many cases, because they've seen retribution happen within the department and they've seen retribution happen on the streets. And so that fear is real. That fear is real. And that's why I'm telling you, it's the only way, in a certain sense, they have to lead the change from within, because there is a blue shield that exists between the public and truly what is going on. Right? And everybody knows that. If that wasn't the case, these things wouldn't be happening. There wouldn't be so many police that are involved. If you look at what happened in Baltimore, those were cops that were colluding on planting drugs, even though they had the cameras on, and they mistakenly left the cameras on and were hiding drugs. There have been tons of anecdotes that I've heard about young people in Houston in which they've had drugs placed on them, because there are people that do that. If people that have that protection and are given that place in society are choosing to work behind the lines and do those types of things, that's a scary thing. If a cop pulls me over and I'm just trying to talk about my rights and he's threatening me with my life or anything else, guess what? More than likely, I'm going to comply simply as a survival reflex. And so that's why cops are refusing to come out, because they are truly afraid for their own lives. They're afraid for their families, and they're afraid from their futures, because these people got to put bread on the table. There needs to be legislation to protect whistleblowers that are blowing the whistle within these police departments. because without that type of protection, people are not going to come over. We have to have whistleblower legislation just for things in general, because people don't even want to turn in their corporate bosses. So just imagine when that person is capable of holding a .45 caliber and saying, you better not say anything. I'm the lieutenant here. You're going to ruin my life. And you're going to say, well, I think I might just keep my mouth shut. This is the reality. It's a lot of violence.
So this goes back to the whole premise of my documentary, which my thesis statement for this is that there really are no good cops because the corrupt system won't allow them to be good. And so how do we, right, like they're honestly from the experiences that, you know, just trying to get people to talk about, because it's like, okay, even if we go to, you know, the profession of teaching, which is kind of, you know, in the same realm of like public service, like teachers go on strike, they will do interviews, they will tell you X, Y, and Z, they'll tell the parents, they'll tell the administration what is wrong, why I'm not being effective, whatever, so it gets better. The fact that these cops literally will not even say what can be done to make this better is a huge problem to me. Like, that is like, I don't even know how you even begin to fix it if the people that knows what's really going on and probably how to fix it, or at least, you know, what areas we need to touch, won't even say what those things are.
I've got a lot to say, actually, and I hope if I'm wrong about some of this higher tier stuff, I hope Juan can educate me, because I know he's very qualified to do so. But I think number one of the things that we definitely need to do is and I talked about last week, is unqualified immunity. If the police departments aren't going to hold themselves accountable, then the citizens that they serve need to be able to. I think that's a big thing. Number two, I think that anything worth doing is difficult and won't be easy. I think we need to implore the good cops that we all personally know to, you know, be the whistleblowers. And, you know, maybe it will cost them their lives. But I, as somebody that's risked their lives for others on numerous occasions, to me, somebody else's life is worth it. I know that's not easy to say or do for some people. I can only say it because I've been put in the situation where I've placed my own life in danger several times in order to save somebody else's life, both as a Marine and as a swiftwater rescue swimmer in the volunteer fire department. It's important. And yes, you may be threatened. You may even be killed. But if that's what it takes for the right thing to be done, it's worth it. I believed it was worth it when I went into Raging Waters. I believed it was worth it when I went into the middle of a hot intersection, that somebody else's life was worth me risking mine. So we need to implore the good police officers to uphold that oath and to be brave. I think Reverend Jazir will really like this. It's I can't remember the book, but it's when Joshua is taking over command from Moses of the Israelites. He's told, be strong and courageous. Not once, not twice, but I think 3 times. We need to tell our police officers that we know are good men and good women. We said, be strong and courageous. The road ahead is not easy. Be strong and courageous. Do not give up the fight that easy. You know, and then there are awesome men of tremendous influence in positions that if they just take a stand, I think they will embolden the people below them. Obviously, Juan, I looked you up on LinkedIn right before we got started. What an impressive resume, man! I would like if somebody ever threatens you because you're standing up for what's right, give me a call. Like, give me a call. I'm 6'1" and 205 pounds. I used to fight Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I went to Iraq twice. I ain't scared of shit. You know, Reverend Jazir, same thing, man. Like, you guys both have such a tremendous voice in your communities that just due to who I am, I would never have that voice. But what I can say is is if you ever choose to be brave, you won't be alone. I think people choosing to be brave sets an example that others will follow.
At a very young age, I pretty much made the decision that my life wasn't my own. If I would have just wanted to exploit to the maximum of my own talents or my own capacities to just be self-serving, I'd be in a totally different station in life. And that's the very honest truth. That's not being presumptuous. That's just the reality. I've decided to serve the community. We need more people that are willing to make personal sacrifices to make that happen. I remember when I was deeply involved in a lot of immigration rights protests, even my own mother said, aren't you afraid that you might get shot or that someone might do something to you or that it might hurt your career? And I said, hey, at the end of the day, what would Jesus do? We need more people that are willing to take those personal sacrifices. When enough people fall on the sword, then they can't blackball everybody. You understand what I'm saying? It becomes like a cascade. When several people stand up, I mean, that's the whole premise of nonviolence protests in America that we actually borrow from Gandhi in India, where Martin Luther King was trained in that style. What it was that eventually, when you got, 50,000 people, 100,000 people peacefully protesting, they shoot one, they shoot two, but eventually they drop their weapons when they see that their own lack of humanity is thrust back at them. And that's the type of thing that we need right now. We need people that are willing to go out there and assume those risks. And without risk, there will be no progress. We can't change never occurs from a position of comfort. It never has and never will. And so we need some of our brothers in blue to surrender that place of comfort to help us, because I can't infiltrate that area. I don't have the respect of those officers. I don't deal with those people. I'm not on the streets facing the bullets and the violence and everything else that they face. My voice isn't as impactful as if one of the brothers in blue says, you know what, I'm going to say the right thing. Are you with me? And if you're not with me, I got to do it anyway because humanity demands it.
So Quan, what do you think about the whole idea of defunding the police? Because I personally think, like, when I first heard, I was like, what are y'all talking about? But then when you actually start reading about what they're talking about as far as defunding, I'm actually interested in, them developing more of a platform for this. But I think the wording of defund is where they're kind of going wrong, and why they won't get the support that they need is because, like, the wording isn't, the semantics is wrong. But go ahead, Quan.
So I should start my comments by saying, of course, I'm now speaking. Well, this entire time I've been speaking, and especially now, speaking of my own personal court, right? So these are just my own views. I think one, to your latter point, actually, the use of the term defund certainly is often conflated with the abolish the police movement. And you're right and correct to trumpet the fact that they mean different things. And that's important to understand because you can support defunding the current levels of funding for the police without necessarily saying that you believe that you shouldn't have the police. In fact, if you take a look at police budgets, you actually can take a huge chunk out of some of these budgets without ever really touching the types of crime fighting activity that we tend to associate with the police. So a lot of those costs, for instance, are wrapped up in a bunch of personnel red tape that it may be debatable whether we even need as many police. I know it's a dangerous thing to say, but if you reduce the amount of things that you send police to actually answer for, you would actually reduce in part the need for some of the police. You certainly might reduce the need for some of the materials or equipment that the police need to have in order to carry out their work that they currently do. And I think what I would also say is that we, in addition to the idea of defunding police, perhaps before we even get to that part, is the question of defining what the police profession is. And
yes, I completely agree with that, because I feel like the whole title of law enforcement is wrong, because they're not the law, they're the safety part of it. And so, like, they're actually operating outside of what I feel is what their job description is in a lot of instances. Like, it should be safety enforcement, in my opinion, instead of law enforcement. But go ahead, continue your point.
No, I mean, and certainly others should jump in as well. I think the primary function of police, at least at their inception, so obviously, I don't say obviously, but I think we know that the primary function of police at the inception, the kind of like real thing that prompted it was certainly aspects of racial control. But this was under the guise of an order maintenance function, right? Of maintaining the peace, of allowing it so that citizens could carry on their individual and average lives without fear of, unfortunately, at that time, being accosted by this kind of fictional black boogeyman. But I think the general idea of having police and law enforcement in place more so for the purpose of keeping the peace rather than punishing folks and finding people to punish, I think actually changes to some extent what you see law enforcement doing. Also, I think, redefining what we consider as criminal justice or even safety matters, right? Places where just generalized disorder seems to be contextualized or categorized as a public safety issue. It's not necessarily a public safety issue when someone's having a mental breakdown. That should be probably more of a public health issue. If you're bothered by seeing drug use on your streets, that's not necessarily a public safety issue. That's just you don't like seeing that. And actually, there may be a number of ways in which we might address what you average citizen don't like seeing, including through the public health system. And so I think that understanding what we think are appropriate for the types of people that we identify as police, we either have to rethink what that is, what policing is, right? Or we have to rethink who the police are, right? I really appreciate your offer of, being able to protect me if I decide to stand up. I think the thing is, look, the type of people that we are bringing into our police force are actually more of the background of folks that were soldiers and people who held weapons and fought wars. Much of policing is not that. And I will tell you, as a person who never served, so thank you, John, for your service, but who did serve as a police officer. I was a police officer for nearly 2 years. And nearly none of what I did really required military skill at all. I think I might have touched my gun only a few times in that entire time. I'll tell you, I certainly spent much more of my time doing conflict management or talking to kids about how they should behave or, clearing out streets or maintaining order during festivals than I ever did, like actually maintaining a weapon and running into the heat of battle. If we want police to do all those activities that I just listed, all the talking to folks and just kind of like, you have a problem with each other and I'm going to help you talk it through or something, marriage counseling, raising people's kids and the like, then you don't need the types of people who are best equipped to rush into the heat of battle. And so you need to rethink then who the police officers are. But one of those two things don't match. You got to match the organization to its mission. You got to match the people within the organization to the mission that you're assigning to that organization. I don't think that we have a good match on that.
If I could interject, I completely agree. When I was growing up, I often heard the term peace officer. Like that's how I grew up. It was peace officer. They were, if you had a problem, like growing up, you could go to them and you could talk to them. Nowadays, it seems like they're too busy to deal with those little squabbles in there. Like, well, we gotta chase these drug dealers, we gotta be militant, and I'm like, that's not your job, man. Like that's not what the job is. And I actually have a little bit of experience. I sell part of what I do now is I sell training to law enforcement. And one of the things that I talk to them about is a lot of these videos that we see that end up as fatal shootings. I'm like, if you watch the videos, you can probably, in a 2-minute video, you can probably see at least 5 to 6 times where the officer could have de-escalated the situation and he chose to continue to escalate it. And that, as a citizen, as a voting citizen, as a tax-paying citizen, that bothers me. That you had an opportunity as an authority figure to save a life and to de-escalate, and instead you were more comfortable with escalating it. And what we talked about last week was that I believe that untrained, panicked, insecure people often act out violently. I believe that. I believe that with a big part of my heart, that when you have people that aren't trained, when you have people that have no idea what they're doing, the only thing they resort to is anger and force. They don't resort to logic. They don't resort to anything else aside from those two things. And one of the things that I can get on board with as far as the defund the police, despite the name, is reallocating funds for training. I think you were 100% right. Often we don't need as many officers as the city says. We need better trained officers.
Officers, I mean, in this, I'm always kind of confused, even how these people that are, like you said, poorly trained, they don't have, self-esteem, they're angry. How do they always end up making the cut? Like, I don't even understand.
I think that part of the thing is that, even sometimes when you talk to some law enforcement officers, like even casually, they have in a sense that in a mentality that it is us versus them. So even your frame of reference from where and how you encounter the public is going to affect how you're seeing things. How do we look at people that have drug addictions? Do we look at them as, sinister deviants that are trying to destroy societies? Or do we look at them as somebody who's making a call for help and is coping for it in a really bad way? How do we see these things? And so a lot of that is colored by that sort of script that they're given. You're the last line of defense for the community. You have to do this. So when you already are framing the narrative between how you're going to interact with the community as though there's some type of enemy, rather than we're all part of an embedded community and this is a family and our job is to try to solve these family issues in the least traumatic way as possible. I really like what John said about the peace officer is training people how to resolve things without having that trauma. By actually, the officer should not remove himself as part of the community. If you look, even when they present themselves, it's like we're over here and the community is over here.
To me, and John, you kind of spoke on this last week about you find the enemy that you're looking for, and it's like,
Exactly.
why is the police treating the people as the enemy? Like, yeah, some riots may jump off, but like that's your first reaction is y'all about to riot, so we about to come in here with all this gear of war, and it's like, are we not the community that you're supposed to be protecting, or are we the enemy?
Regardless of whether they want to or not, part of the reality in this modern technology is that there's just going to be a mountain of video. And it's going to force that. It may not come easily, but oftentimes that's how it happens. That's why we're even having these discussions now.
I have two questions before we get off the line. The first of which is, what will happen if Derek Chauvin and the rest of his goonies do not get convicted and are free to go about their lives? What will happen if there is no justice in the George Floyd case? John, we'll start with you.
I think you're going to see an uproar from the community, no doubt. As somebody that's seen just violence across the globe in various formats, I think anytime that you deny people justice, man, I don't know. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I don't think it'll be good for the conversation. I think this will be one of those things that Quan talked about earlier, where the conversation probably gets moved back a few steps because the right things weren't done. I think it's pretty clear. Unfortunately, I'm not jury eligible in Minneapolis. Else I would really fight for justice to be done. But I can't really do much from San Antonio, Texas in that case. But I can say that, and I don't want to sound like a threat, but I like to consider myself a student of human behavior. And when you blatantly illustrate that there's a law for me, but not for thee, or the other, however the saying goes, you know, when you blatantly illustrate that some people in the community are above the law, I think you thought it was violent before. Man, people that are oppressed don't like to be oppressed for long. You can see that in every revolution that's taken place in the course of human history. People will have their breaking point.
And I think that you'd have a massive breakdown in community relations between the law enforcement and the community. I think that you would definitely see an uptick in protesting, rioting, and violence. I think that when justice is denied, what ends up happening is people try to take justice into their own hands. And unfortunately, when that form of justice is applied, it's applied with broad strokes. That means that innocent people are going to suffer. That means that people that have absolutely nothing to do with the situation will fall victim to it. I mean, we saw what happened in LA in '92. We've already seen some of the things that have happened in Minneapolis and in other communities where people have lost faith in the law enforcement. But it will be a watershed moment in American history, because I think what it's going to do is it's going to bring everybody out of the woodworks to bring change, and that there's going to be a desire to out all these people. It's going to, it would definitely be a bad look for our country. It would show that we are incapable of holding people accountable who have obviously killed somebody and on camera. And so when you, as a society, is not able to bring people to justice, when it's rather obvious what's going on, it creates less faith in that, and it starts to accelerate change. But the thing is that how is that change going to occur? Is it going to be peaceful, or is it not going to be peaceful? And most likely it won't be very peaceful.
Do you agree with the statues being taken down? Yes or no, Jazeer?
Well, this is what I'll tell you. I don't think you see many statues erected to Hitler in Germany. I look at Germany and the way that they dealt with those things, and how they kept the concentration camps alive, and did a massive public education campaign where they really educate the youth. Every year they're required to revisit those things and to reanalyze the ethos of the nation and the soul of the nation, to try not to repeat those things. I think that in some cases, a statue being torn down and the stump of a statue right there also sends a powerful message to the society, saying that the former narrative about who is to be, who we are and what we're expecting in a nation, it begins to change. Some things are no longer just socially acceptable. We talk about film. People used to do blackface. Do blackface now. That's no longer acceptable. Certain things change, right? Yeah. And so every society starts to redefine the narrative. Do I believe that these things need to still exist? Yes. Maybe it's not appropriate to put it in. And in some cases, what has happened is that these communities are no longer reflective of those people that are being venerated. So, a lot of people are hesitant saying that history will be repeated. That history is only repeated when our mindset doesn't change. What you see visually, it's going to change. It's going to change. Every time we erect monuments, they're taken down and they're resurrected. The symbols that one times dominate a nation are no longer at times accepted. Do I agree with it? If that community decides they want to take it down, take it down.
Do I agree with them being taken down? Yes.
Why?
Because I think I would second many of the things that Pastor Jared said. They don't represent the current mores of the community. They, even at the time that they were erected, in fact, at the time that the men who are representing them were even alive, they represented traitors to the country. And it's odd to me that a country would venerate its enemies. I think that there has never been a really good reason to venerate them in the way that they were. And I think that there certainly is not one right now.
John?
I think yes, with some nuance. I think Reverend Jazeer made a very good point about what Germany has done. Put them in museums. Teach people that this is not who you want to be. Yes, this is part of our history. This is something that we should remember, and it's something that we should learn from to be better. You know, these people don't need to be held in a place of honor to remind us of our history. We can still like you said, you know, there's no statues of Hitler in Germany, but bring up Hitler in Germany and see if you don't get punched in the mouth. They are not you know, and I think that's, you know, one of the things that I said to one of my friends is I was like, I don't see why we're defending statues of people that should have never had statues in the first place. You know, if your sole contribution was that you were a great Confederate general, well, bro, you lost. Like, and I say that as a Southerner, like people that say heritage, not hatred. Well, your heritage was that of the loser. You're going to celebrate being a loser. Come on, man. You know, so I think museums, yes. And put them in museums. Be like, hey, this is what this dude did. It's part of who we are, but it's not a place that we want to celebrate. It's a place that we want to remember and grow from. Not a place that we want to honor and hold in high regard today.
All right. Thank you guys for being on the show. Thank you all for watching the show. So again, make sure you like this video and also make sure you comment, be part of the conversation. Because again, this is how we move forward, is when everybody is a part of the conversation and we can use our voices, our platforms individually to bring about change. Peace.